We caught a hop-on, hop-off bus to the port of Edinburgh to visit the royal yacht Britannia. Queen Elizabeth's father, King George VI, commissioned the ship on February 4, 1952, but died just 2 days later. An audio tour begins in the bridge, which looks like it did when the ship was launched in 1953. The flag deck holds many different flags, which can be hoisted aloft to convey messages to adjacent ships. The Sun Lounge occupied the rear of the upper deck and was one of the Queen's favorite rooms on board the ship. An open deck just outside was the scene of many family games. The state drawing room was the main reception area aboard the ship. The royal family used this room for relaxing, conversation, and games. Princess Diana and Princess Margaret enjoyed playing the baby grand piano found here. The royal dining room was used for state dinners and can be reserved for private dinner parties. The Queen and King had separate sitting rooms that they used to conduct royal business while on board the ship. They also had separate bedrooms to which they could retire. There was a separate bedroom that was used for royal couples, such as Charles and Diana, on their honeymoon. The Queen had her Rolls Royce on board at all times in case land transportation was needed. The Britannia also carried the royal barge to land the Queen in ports that were too small to dock the Britannia. Life for the crew was not quite as elegant as it was for the Queen. This room was part of the Admiral's quarters. The officers and non-commissioned officers had separate lounge areas. The Queen needed a royal band on board for all official functions. And of course, the officers' mess was not quite as elegant as the royal dining room. And the sleeping quarters for the crew was a little more cramped than that for the Queen. There was a fully staffed hospital on board just in case. And with as many as 6 changes in uniforms during the day, there was always a need for a good laundry. Not sure how many times the Queen made it down to the engine room, but it sparkled as much as her crown. Leaving the Britannia, we headed back into town and hustled up the hill to the Edinburgh Castle to witness the 1 o'clock cannon blast. This has been a tradition since 1861 that allows ships in the harbor to set their clocks. It is also the most crowded time of the day in the castle, so make sure you get there early. Our Cadu membership allowed us to skip the long entry lines. The Argyle battery is just below the location of the 1 o'clock gun. These are cast iron, front-loading cannons dating from the Napoleonic era. They sit atop the north face of Castle Hill that provides a great view of Newtown. This section of Edinburgh was built in the 1700s after a lake was drained. On March 14, 1314, 30 armed men from Robert the Bruce's army scaled the north face of Castle Hill, surprising the British garrison and reclaiming the castle for the Scots. Continuing uphill and curving to the left, you pass through Foog's Gate to enter the upper ward of the castle. St. Margaret's Chapel dates from 1120 and is the oldest building in Edinburgh. It also sits at the highest point of the city, some 440 feet above the harbor. In 1057, Malcolm III murdered King Macbeth and assumed the Scottish throne. He married Princess Margaret and thus united his Highland Scots with her lowland Anglo-Saxons. They settled on this hill and began the city of Edinburgh. Margaret died in the castle in 1093, and her son King David I built this simple chapel in her honor. He also built Holyrood Abbey that lies at the other end of the Royal Mile. Just outside the chapel is this 15th century siege cannon called Mons Meg. It could fire a 330-pound stone, a distance of nearly 2 miles. The Half Moon Battery was constructed between 1573 and 1588. King David II, who was Robert the Bruce's son, had living quarters below this location. This was the original site of the 1 o'clock gun until an artillery shell exploded and damaged some of the nearby buildings. Passing through a narrow passageway between these two buildings, you enter the Crown Square. This is the main courtyard of the castle. The square is formed by the Royal Palace to the east, the Great Hall to the south, the Queen Anne Building to the west, and the National War Memorial to the north. The Royal Palace contains the royal apartments, the crown jewels of Scotland, and the Stone of Scone. This stone was taken in 1296 by Edward I. All English monarchs have been crowned with this stone under their throne since. It was stolen by students in 1950, but returned to Westminster Abbey for Queen Elizabeth's coronation. The Great Hall was used for royal receptions and has a hammer beam ceiling like the Great Hall at Stirling Castle. The Scottish National War Memorial stands on the site of the medieval St. Mary's Church and memorializes Scottish soldiers who have died in both world wars and in more recent conflicts. The exploration of Edinburgh Castle is hard on the feet and legs. Leaving the castle, we decided to give ourselves a break from walking by riding the 3 different routes of the hop-on, hop-off bus to view some of the city sights from the comfort of an air-conditioned seat. Edinburgh sits on hills that are remains of ancient volcanoes. Castle Hill is one of these. At the other end of town, another volcanic peak forms Holyrood Park. You can take a leisurely stroll along Salisbury Craigs, or you can run up to the 820-foot tall hill called Author's Seat and recreate a scene from the movie Chariots of Fire. You will also view Edinburgh Castle from a different perspective and appreciate its strategic location high above the city. You will pass by the 200-foot tall Sir Walter Scott monument several times. The monument shelters a statue of the author, surrounded by busts of 16 great Scottish poets and 64 characters from his books. If you choose, you can get off the bus and climb the 287 stairs to the top of the monument for what I'm told are great views of Edinburgh. The Scottish Parliament was dissolved in 1707 when Scotland was united with England. It was reinstituted in 1999 and moved into this building in 2004. We passed by the Queen's Gallery and Holyrood House on two different routes. Holyrood is the Queen's residence when she visits Edinburgh. Grasmarket was once the site of public hangings. Residents above the aptly named Last Drop Pub would rent out their windows to curious onlookers. Now it is the scene of a public market. You can catch a glimpse of the John Knox House, the residence of Robert Burns, and the house of the Scottish Prime Minister on Charlotte Square. Riding the hop-on, hop-off bus gives you a great viewpoint from which you can enjoy the varied architecture of the city. Having rested our weary feet, we rode the bus back to the castle area and began a walk down the Royal Mile. This is the main drag in the old part of Edinburgh and extends downhill from the castle to Holyrood House. It has many opportunities for shopping and excursions into side alleys along the way. Our last stop of the day was at St. Giles Cathedral. This is Scotland's most important church. It contains memorials to many of Scotland's most famous sons, including a statue of John Knox, who preached in this church. It contains some beautiful architecture, including some unique ceilings. There are several beautiful stained glass windows in the church also. St. Giles is situated about a third of the way down the Royal Mile from the castle. The massive interior columns date from 1124, but most of the current building dates from the 14th century. St. Giles was the patron saint of Edinburgh.